this Saturday in Australia, or Sunday in Australia, Saturday here, Errol Spence returns to the ring for the first time in almost exactly 3 years to the day against former WBO super welterweight champ Tszyu. And yeah, this is a fight. When it was first discussed, when we discussed it, I was leaning towards Tszyu. Didn't like the way Errol sounded, even speech wise, respectfully at that kickoff presser, and we talked about it back in May around Benavidez Zerto. And then as time has gone on, and now we're all the way here in fight week, and I see the way Errol Spence is looking on the pads with Ronnie Shields, looks sharp, still looks like he's heavy-handed. I think even though he's the one coming up from welterweight, he's the bigger guy, fighting at 160 pounds for both fighters now. I think I might be leaning towards Errol Spence, but let's break it all down. This is fighters who have both had to sustain punishment. Errol outside of the ring with the car accident, the Terrence Crawford fight, and Tszyu getting stopped twice in the last couple years by Bakram and Fundora. But now that fight week is here, what are you thinking? I'll get into my breakdown as well. But what are you thinking?
Well, listen, I have to start with a disclaimer. I have wrestled with where I am on this fight, and the first and honest answer really is I don't know, because there's just too much time, too many factors, too much uncertainty around what Errol might bring or what he has anymore. There's not enough for me to bite into to be like, oh, well, this is what I'm hanging on to say what will happen on, let's say, Saturday night, because the time in the middle is such a void. The fact that I'm invested in the end of Errol Spence's career being anything but getting the shit beat out of him by Terrence Crawford and then getting smashed in Australia by Tszyu makes me, it's impossible for me to be anything but as biased as I actually am. Some people think we look alike. I hear that in the comments. So when I see him fight, you know what I mean? I see myself in there. Like I'm one of those. I'm in this situation. I'm like, I'm one of these guys who see a reflection of myself in a fighter. I think that's true of all of us at some point. That's part of what makes us fans. I think that's part of what makes fans so directly associated with and emotionally invested in people they've never met, is because you want to see the warrior in yourself, right? I've had so much time on the board with Errol Spence, so many good interviews, so many great fights. I can't let it end this way. I can't. I can't. So because there's no counterfactual evidence to say that he gets beat on Saturday, I'm going to hang on to the positive. I'm going to hang on to my belief system that a guy is great, and he is great. That Terrence Crawford loss, the car accident, I think the long time out, his lack of charisma and charm, if we're just going to be flat about it, and flat is the word. I mean, it's been flat. Like when watching the build up to this fight, I'm like fighting to stay awake. There's nothing entertaining about it. I'm really having a hard time getting interested in any of the programming building up to this fight whatsoever. So the only thing that's driving me is wanting Spence to come back and reclaim some portion of this former glory, to give me some hope that there's a future. You'll remember when we started talking about the fight, I was talking about the return of Spence, maybe fighting Fundora. You know, maybe this is on his way to reclaiming world championship status from some of these young boys. I want to see Charlo at least have a bite at it to do the same and maybe have an opportunity to be undisputed. Like this is the hope that I have for the end of those careers. I want them to go out on their shield, on their own terms, in fantastic fights, and hopefully, if I'm honest, I'd like to see him do it, especially Errol Spence, more so even than Charlo. I feel like I've got a more personal connection and a more just emotionally invested in this guy. So the thing I would want to do is to come on here, bury that, put it in some analysis, frame it up in a way that I can express how he might win and put that forward as my prediction. But instead, I'm going to be 100 with you. I just want him to win. And I don't really have any evidence as to why he will or won't. So it's Spence for me by knockout.
Well, to be fair, the last time you did this with Deontay Wilder, it worked out. He did wind up beating Derek Chisora, and now he's in talks to fight Usyk, which I was telling you last December, a little too ambitious, Raheem, but it might be exactly what happens. And I also said too ambitious, giving him a chance to beat Usyk at this stage of their careers, and then Usyk almost lost to a kickboxer. So maybe he does have a chance after all. So, it's worked out for you before. But
yeah, man. Sometimes the boxing god gives you what you really deserve, and I think Errol Spence has earned a good finish. I know he's close to the end. I'm not delusional about that, but it can't be Australia against Tszyu. That cannot be the end. Not for Errol Spence.
Okay.
And there's other elements that I do want to get into, but I'm going to let you jump back in there.
Well, when it comes to Spence as a great fighter, I think, it's borderline. I think I understand. I was there when you were like a row ahead of me or in the same row when he was spectacular against Mikey Garcia in Cowboy Stadium. 47,000 people there. And say what you want about Mikey. Undersized, yes, but almost damn near 40-0 and a top 10 pound for pound guy who legitimate boxing people were giving a chance to upset Errol Spence. So that was a dominant performance. That was the best Errol Spence ever looked to me. And then even before the accident against Sean, something was starting to be a little bit off. I'll never get over being ringside in LA that night, and I kept looking at Spence's legs, and something about them were thin to me compared to the tank of a welterweight throughout his whole frame that I saw when he fought Kell Brook, when he fought Lamont Peterson, when he fought Mikey Garcia in Texas. And then the accident happens and takes a bite out of him. And then another thing is the lifestyle that he's been open about. And you got to wonder if those years of the lifestyle stuff outside of the ring, if that catches up with him over the long haul in this fight, even if he has done all the right things in the last couple months for this camp, But I know he beat Sean. He beat Ugas. He beat Danny. He beat Mikey. He beat Kell Brook on enemy territory. He still, to me, might be a Hall of Very Gooder, which is not, that's an excellent category to be in too, but that's another discussion for another day. He certainly will be on the ballot for the Hall of Fame. It may get in after all anyways, and this would help his case. When you talk about the boxing gods, right, and it can't end this way for Errol Spence's decorated career, getting beat by Tszyu in Australia, I'll push back against that. There have been worse fates, as you know. And Tszyu, I think, is a little underrated when I see people talking about him heading into this fight. They're now treating him like he was just a hype job, the son of Costa, and got knocked out a few times, and that's that. He doesn't have a sparkling resume, but Tony Harrison, Terrell Goucher, Brian Mendoza, hot off of knocking out Sebastian Fundora, those are all solid wins. And Tszyu, people forget, was, I believe, the number 1 ranked super welterweight by Ring and was slated to fight Jermell Charlo for undisputed, and then Charlo opted to get the big payday with Canelo and move 2 weight classes up. And that brings us to where, when you talk about the boxing gods, is it fair for Tszyu to end this way too? To be looked at as a never was after his career was
a Black American fighter. I've never really covered his career. This is about me, Sean. I don't know how many times I have to tell you this. But also let's deal with the.
But I just mean just the boxing gods. He's winning the first couple rounds against Fundora. He gets split open, and it's all gone left ever since then. And he's originally supposed to fight Keith Thurman. What if he beats Fundora that night when he's up 2 rounds to nothing and busted Bondora's nose wide open in the first 2 rounds. And you know what if the boxing gods are allowing him to have some form of redemption back home in Australia? I know we're having fun with this. We're not being literal here, but yeah.
He won't get it for this because immediately the conversation will turn to how washed Spence was. He should have never came back. The layoff was too long. He should have taken a tune-up fight. He was too ambitious to go right into the fire. The changing of trainers. There's a laundry list of excuses for why Tszyu wins this fight over Errol Spence that take the credit away from whatever Tszyu does in there. Even if he deserves the credit, he won't get it because they're gonna.
But if Errol Spence loses, he's a has-been. If Tszyu loses, he's a never was. And that's a cruel fate to suffer from the boxing gods.
Well, respectfully, this is not me downing Tszyu. It's really just about a narrative that I think honestly, Tim could probably come back after this fight easier than Errol Spence does. He's still got Australia at his back. He could still compete. And if Errol looks great in their prime, I don't think anybody's picking Tszyu over Spence. The reason that this is as big a question mark as it is, and why some people I can understand picking Tszyu, is because of what we don't know about Errol Spence. And I don't think he is Hall of Fame yet. I said he's great, and I believe that, but it's now the time when the greatness is evident or not. If he doesn't make this mark, if he can't get over and through Tszyu, it's a hard argument to make in the annals of boxing history that you are great, because the adversity really, outside of the Terrence Crawford fight, comes from outside of the ring. Like that perseverance and overcoming, that's this chapter. And I get that it's late in the book, but if he does come back, if he looks something of his former self or better, if maybe all that stuff that I have spoken about without detail, out of respect, but without detail, I've mentioned many times that there are things outside the ring, I believe, that kept him from being his best in the last couple of years that we saw him fight. Those things are what he has to overcome to really reach his potential. And against the greatest of all odds, father time, car accident, a beating by Crawford, a long layoff with a live dog, or maybe even he's the underdog, depending on who you ask and how you size this whole thing up.
I'm going to check that out real quick as you say it. One last time.
This is the moment where Spence can be great and get on that Hall of Fame ballot for real. He's got to beat Tszyu, and then he's got to go on to continue to compete. He's got to do the thing now that is better than good. He's got to do the thing now that is more difficult than just being a good fighter. Now you have to find something in you to be greater than most people could be in your situation. That's what's in front of Errol Spence. That's what I'm rooting for. That's why I got to be transparent about wanting him to win genuinely. And even if I wanted him to win genuinely and saw enough evidence to say to the contrary, what the contrary would be, I'd say it, and then I would tell you I want him to win. The thing is, I just don't have the evidence. That 3 years is such a big mystery. What he spent that time doing, how he feels about it, the fact that he did come in against Tszyu in a fight that can be described as nothing but a legitimate challenge, a serious opponent, means to me that he does believe that whatever went on in those 3 years reconstituted him, brought him back to who he maybe never was the best of himself, and overcoming those other obstacles in life. He feels like not only am I back on track, but I'm taking the fast track. I want the big fight. I want to go to Australia. He said he wants to go to Australia because he didn't want to be at home even to be tempted by all the distractions, to have to do all the interviews, to have to deal with what it is to be in Dallas. And, that's wise to me. That's telling me that
is
what
that
he's really
truth or rationalization, though? Is that truth or is that rationalization? Is it no? It's in Australia because this is the guy as of right now. When you haven't fought in 3 years, coming off a loss, this is the guy who can actually sell tickets in this area and produce more money for both of you then this isn't 2019 against Mikey Garcia. You're not going to be able to put 47,000 people there. You're not going to be able to put 40,000 people like 2022 against Ugas. Is that cope, as the kids say, or is that truth?
I would believe that if he was doing this fight because he was broke, or if he was doing this fight because he didn't have any other options. If it wasn't Tszyu, then nobody wants to see Errol Spence. If that were the case, then I would get it. But Spence had other options. And he's not hurting for money, so he could take the slow road. He could take an easier fight. He could sell tickets at home. It won't be Cowboy Stadium,
right?
But he can put a decent showing on
Frisco.
At home.
He could put 10, 15,000 in there. Yeah.
And so another thing that I've been convinced of in his subsequent interviews in this void of late is him talking about the Terrence Crawford fight. Now again, this is going to touch a lot of people in the soft meat. They're going to be real sensitive about this. So it doesn't matter how much I put in front of what I'm about to say. You're only going to hear what your little soft body wants to hear. You're going to feel it in the gut. So as I said, those of you who really just can't emotionally have an adult conversation, put your earmuffs on. This conversation is for the rest of us. I believe him when he says that, that he wasn't 100% for the Crawford fight. That doesn't mean that Crawford doesn't have a legitimate victory over Errol Spence and deserve all the accolades for beating the guy who was in front of him. But in that fight, in the lead up to that fight, if you'll remember, Sean, I said he's not right. He's not right. And listen, this is coming from a guy who picked Spence to beat Crawford 4 or 5 years before the fight, which some people still say is crazy. But at the time, that's before the car accident. That's before a lot of the personal shit was really prominent and a problem. And I believed that at that time, yes, I was giving him an edge on a very close 50-50 fight, but I was picking Spence. So I changed my pick before that fight, begrudgingly.
You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. I pick in real time. I do things for real. Like, I'm not, like, you know what I mean? I'll say what it is right up until the opening bell. If the ring walk changes my mind, I'm telling you, I changed my pick. You understand? But I say that to say that yes, I believe that Errol Spence can be better than we've ever seen him if he were to have reached his potential at any point in his career. And I don't think he has yet reached his potential, and maybe it's too late. Maybe these 3 years off, maybe that beating from Terrence Crawford, maybe all this outside the ring shit, maybe age, maybe who knows, damage he's taken will never allow him to get to where he could have been. But I don't think he's ever been to where he could have been. So I'm waiting to see if this is that moment. If in fact that Crawford fight wasn't even the best of Spence at the time because his rib was hurt, because he was on cortisone, or is that what he said, cortisone?
Yeah.
That's a big factor. I mean, that's a big factor in why he got beat the way he got beat. That's a big factor in why he was so lethargic in my mind and seemingly out of it even in the build-up to the fight. That's a big factor in what the fight ultimately ended up being. Not to say that Terrence Crawford doesn't beat him, maybe if he is at his best, but the fact that he wasn't gives him something to hold on to and gives him some redemption arc in this fight to come back and be like, you know what? Yes, physically I was beaten, but mentally maybe he's not, because he knows that physically he wasn't at his best. And if that can become evident in this fight, we're on the road to maybe greatness, like actual greatness that's not arguable.
Well, yeah, I think, you remember I always picked Crawford because I thought the best counterpuncher of his generation would use one of Spence's greatest attributes, his volume, against him. It would present too many counterpunching opportunities for Crawford and, all that. But, yeah, I do agree that Spence didn't look like the guy I saw beat up Kell Brook, Lamont Peterson, and Mikey Garcia against Terrence Crawford. Terrence had a lot to do with that too. I do think all that stuff, the accident, the lifestyle, it in all likelihood has an accumulative effect that chips away, that takes some pound of flesh, no matter how much you recover strong from it and change up thereafter to where, he's not going to be able to reach whatever peak you're talking about could have been reached in the real peak and prime of his career, his early 30s, late 20s. but that doesn't mean he can't recover a lot of his form. And alongside recovering that form under Ronnie Shields, add a wrinkle or two with experience and age and wisdom, and have a not a reinvention, but be a good old Spence, not just an old Spence, like Nonito Donaire knocking out Ubali, taking Inoue 12 tough rounds. That wasn't the same Nonito Filipino flash of his peak years, but he remolded himself just enough, along with that grown older man strength and wisdom, to be an effective in his late 30s, second half of his 30s fighter. And maybe that's the Errol Spence we can get. And I think it's a blessing that this fight ultimately had to go to 160, because I think 154 against the three-headed monster atop that division, guys like Virgil, Gerard Ennis, Sebastian Fundora, I think that was too ambitious for the 36-year-old Errol Spence. But 160, where there's not a whole lot of talent there, where Carlos Adames' belt might become vacant, where I'm forgetting, Arislandi Lara is 42 years old and has a belt there. Now we're talking about a much more realistic path to becoming champion again for Errol Spence or for Tszyu in this fight. And I think, even looking a step ahead, I like the idea of Errol Spence and Jesus Ramos for the vacant WBC belt. Jesus Ramos is with PBC as well. He is a WBC interim champion. Adames has talked about moving up to 68. So, that's more, okay, now we're talking about a more realistic path to being champion. But as for the fight itself, the reason why for weeks I haven't really wanted to pick this fight, again, at first, I thought Tszyu. I thought people in America are overlooking that Tszyu is the twitchier guy. Tszyu has better hand speed. And Tony Harrison said that motherfucker is sharp. I think he might have said that bitch is sharp, in a complimentary way. But he said, that bitch is sharp, and he's faster than I thought, because he has some good genetics too from his father, Costa Tszyu. He's not his daddy, as Errol Spence pointed out and pressed his button back in May, and he's not I'm not saying you usually associate a guy who could do pull counters and have a little twitch with being good defensively or slick. And Tszyu is not that, but he does have a little twitch to him. He even will step out a little bit. He's a little bit lighter on his feet, even though he doesn't step around and make the circle around the ring in a tight circle the way Errol Spence has been educated to do from the Olympic system that in his pedigree that he's banking on. That he's talking about his pedigree in this fight. But Tszyu is at 31 a little bit the fresher and twitchier guy. But I'll get to that in a second. So, but the reason why I started going towards Spence is what's the most important punch in boxing, Raheem?
Jab.
The jab. And that was Spence's maybe arguably his best punch. At his best, he had one of the best jabs in boxing. And I'm looking at the jab on the mitts with Ronnie Shields, and it still has life. It still has snap. The left hand coming behind it still has snap. I still see Tszyu on the mitts has a little bit more quickness, a little bit more speed and snappiness to him, a little bit more twitchiness to him. But Tszyu doesn't have a good jab. He doesn't have a consistent jab. He has a nice little quick decoy jab, setup jab, touch jab to throw the right hand right behind it, but he doesn't have a consistent jab with volume and one that dictates distance. He likes, when he was at his best, applying educated pressure, touching you a little bit with the lead hand, doing a little bit of a pull counter game, and then boom, uppercut up top, left hook to the body, left hook up top, touch jab, right hand right behind it. And he was implementing that style when he was the soul snatcher was his name, the soul taker, the soul snatcher. Once he had respectfully a piece of his soul snatched from him, from Bakram, and then Fundora, who made him submit in that rematch. Now you're asking one key for a pressure fighter is to trust their chin. And I don't know if he trusts that chin. And that chin is going to be getting tested by the jab throughout this fight. And Errol Spence isn't a snappy guy, but he's a heavy-handed guy. And he's the bigger guy to me. And he's gonna be feeling that jab, and you're asking him to trust his chin, walk through that, get to Spence, and that's gonna be an issue for him. But the reason why I hesitate then to pick Spence, and I really wanted to lay off on this fight, like gamblers say, you lay off the action, is Spence's punch resistance, but maybe even more importantly than that, what is Spence's reaction time on defense 3 years out of the ring? What is that? That's something very interesting to see in this fight. So should I go ahead and give them, though, my final breakdown, though, Raheem, with all that considered, now that I took them through that?
The two things that you said with that excellent amount of analysis and inside the ring boxing breakdown, really the two things for me that stood out in my novice analysis, there are two things that matter the most. First, it's the one that you said last, which we cannot know until that bell rings and these rounds start ticking off, which is, what is Spence's reaction time? How are his reflexes? Is there a such thing as ring rust when it comes to Errol Spence, which he doesn't believe in, which I wholeheartedly believe in when it comes to anybody? That's the first thing that is such a massive factor that we don't know, that makes this hard to predict with your whole chest. The other thing is exactly what you said. The most important punch is the jab. And if you're dealing with a pressure fighter like Tszyu, and you are the bigger man, which based on him now needing to make it 160 and being comfortable, and Errol, I think, probably being bigger in there on the night, he should, not only should it be Tszyu walking onto shots, but it should be Spence breaking him down. It should be a tailor-made fight for him if he has those tools still in the arsenal the way he once did. Like, that jab should be punishing. He should be, that's what Errol Spence does. He breaks down fighters like Tszyu. And that's what, if Errol Spence has those tools at his disposal, and God forbid for Tszyu, if somehow, you know, in these 3 years he's gotten better, or is more focused and is bringing something that nobody expects, really, and I'm just wishing for, then, yeah, my prediction is going to be real. He's going to knock him out. If that's the case, this is a good tailor-made fight for an Errol Spence at his best. All of those things, I think, work in Errol Spence's favor. But the things that we do know, that we're sure about, work in Tszyu's favor, which is why this is hard to predict, because Tszyu's been more active. We've seen him. We know what he's coming with. Yes, if that pressure is there and Errol Spence is a step behind, it's going to be very difficult. That punch resistance, which Errol Spence actually is known for, his good punch resistance, but now we think to the Terrence Crawford fight, and we have to question everything. I'm taking the Terrence Crawford fight with an asterisk, not because it is any less of a loss or any less of a victory for Crawford, but because I take Spence not only at his word, but at my own eye test. I don't think that is representative of the Spence that we should have seen if his life had been together and these injuries hadn't happened in training camp, which I believe him when he says that they did. And I don't think it is representative of the Spence that we will see if these 3 years have been spent well, even though it's been 3 years. So if I take that as an anomaly, I take that as a bad night for Errol, it was a bad camp for Errol, it was a bad time for Errol, and that's the fight that he's in because he needs the money. Well, you know, wants that kind of money he can't get anywhere else because he knows that fight goes away if he doesn't do it right then. That's the fight that maybe he shouldn't have taken at the time and knew it, but did anyway. And if that's the case, we take that not off the table, but as a little bit of a set-aside, then I see this as not only a very winnable fight for Spence, but the kind of fight he should win, unless these other things are still wrong.
Yeah, and he is the slight favorite. I checked that earlier on, forgot to get back to it. He is the slight favorite heading in. And this is the case with every fight. There's always the fight with the self and then the fight with the man across the ring from you. But I think that is more so in this fight. That's even more accentuated for both fighters in this fight. There's really 4 fights going on in this main event. There's Tszyu against Tszyu, and can he apply the pressure the way he did when he was the soul taker the pressure he's going to have to, because, again, at long range, the longer the distances, the more Spence can pump that signature jab of his, probably the worse it is for Tszyu. Tszyu's got to get to mid-range, get underneath some shots, and you got to do that with front foot defense, applying pressure in a lot of spots. Will he trust his chin against the heavy hands, the once heavy hands, and probably still what it looks like with Ronnie Shields, still the heavy hands of Errol Spence? And then for Errol Spence to fight with his self and the ring rust. And what's the punch resistance look like? And don't forget, Ugas rocked him with a right hand right before Crawford too. So yeah, he had a good chin those during his run, but you know, it's not a James Toney Canelo Golovkin chin either. You know, he was wobbled by a guy who doesn't punch as hard as Tim Tszyu, not as physically strong as Tim Tszyu, not going to be as aggressive potentially as Tim Tszyu from 4 years ago against Ugas. So Spence has the fight with the self, and Tszyu has the fight with the self, and then they'll have the fight, of course, with each other. So,
can I just jump in there? I mean, the Ugas fight, yes, obviously I'm aware, but sometimes a guy's just wrong for you. Like that was a long night for Errol Spence. I don't take that on his chin not being up to par. I think that can happen. He got wobbled.
You get hit. Like,
yeah, you came back and won it. Some people think, I know, some people had Ugas win it. I didn't. But, some people did believe. I was there at that fight. People were like, ah! No, I definitely didn't have him winning. But, again, sometimes it's just a hard night at the office. That's what I took that Ugas fight as. Yes, there are 4 fights going on in there, but it's Errol Spence versus Errol Spence, and it's Costa Tszyu versus Tim Tszyu. Or Tim Tszyu versus Costa Tszyu. That is the shadow that Tim hopes to get out of on Saturday night. Now, that may not satisfy the critics, the analysts, some of the fans. Like I said, there'll be plenty of excuses for Errol just waiting as soon as that final bell rings if it goes Tszyu's way. But for Tszyu, it's not. I don't think he's struggling with who he is. He's struggling with defining himself outside of who his father was. That's why that jab at him was so effective. Because that's the dark side. That's the spot. That's the soft meat for him. And if he can retire Errol Spence at home in a sellout, that now you talk about Tim Tszyu and don't have to mention my father for a few more sentences. Now I got this signature win. I retired Errol Spence. You know what I mean? Who's a favorite in my backyard? That moment for him will mean everything, whether anybody gives him credit or sees it that way other than him. That's the fight he's in.
Yeah, I mean, the Aussies, they were raucous when Danny Green knocked out Roy Jones. Roy Jones was a million years in boxing age away from the fighter he was atop the pound-for-pound list, but scoring a win like that in Australia was huge for Danny Green. And Tim compared this fight to his father's fight with Julio Cesar Chavez. Chavez was long removed from his prime in 2000 when Costa knocked him out, but at the end of the day, to have that name on the box rec, it holds weight. And that's a lot for Tim Tszyu to fight for in this fight. If he could retire Errol Spence, like you said, that's a feather in his cap that will definitely make him a bigger star back home in Australia. So he has a lot to fight for too. Errol saying, you're still trying to fight to get out of your dad's shadow. Well, I step out of it if I beat you up this Saturday. So it's a lot for both guys, and it's a good question as to which one is the bigger why. You could argue Tim Tszyu, but now to get to breakdown time once and for all, and just as hot off that point of what Tim has to fight again. I continue to really want to lay off, but if I could give it my best shot this morning, Tuesday morning before the fight, here's what I think it goes like. I believe Tim Tszyu when he says he's going to take it to Errol Spence right away, and he's going to want to figure out what Spence has left right away and crack him hard. And I think that's what he will look to do with Jeff Fenech. And I think in the first 2 or 3 rounds, that'll tell you what's going to happen. I think if he shocks Spence with the sharpness and the deceptive hand speed he has and the snap he has on his power, then I think it's going to be a long and bad night for Errol Spence, or a short night, right? But I think if Spence can weather the storm a little bit early when Tszyu comes out hot, throwing heat, then I think he could be fine. And I think it'll be up to the composure of Errol Spence to step around, take his time a little bit, weather the storm early, fight behind that jab, step around. And if he can do that, and I'm leaning towards he can, then he'll have the championship experience and composure to do it. We'll see if his body holds up along with him. But if he can do that, then I think in the middle of the fight, more in the middle rounds, 4, 5, 6, it starts to really be a war. I think this is gonna be a very entertaining fight. This is not gonna be a bad fight. I don't think either guy at this stage is some defensive wizard to shut the other one down. I think it's gonna be a hit and get hit kind of fight, and it's gonna be very entertaining. I think in those middle rounds it becomes two-way action, and then I think what's gonna start happening over the long haul is Tszyu's moments will become a little bit more sparse because of the volume of Errol Spence and the consistent jab of Errol Spence. And then I think as it gets to the middle part of the fight, some of that ring rust will start to wear off for Spence. And he'll start to get into a groove behind that jab, and the body shots will start coming, and the left hand will start coming, and he'll start to kind of take over and start winning rounds. And Tszyu, who has to get closer and whip his shots, they'll become fewer and farther between because he'll be getting pelted on the outside by Spence and kind of getting broken down by Spence, and he'll be feeling those shots. But I think because Tszyu is fighting at home and fighting for all the things we've said, I don't think that takes him out right away. I think Tszyu, he may get stopped late. He may stop Spence late, but the best scenario I think I can take a stab at is Tszyu doesn't go away, though, even though the fight is is swung towards Spence's favor at that point from the volume. But I think Tszyu has something in the back half in the championship rounds on do or die, on pride, on in front of his crowd. And I think he does some in some moments there. But I think Spence will make it through those moments himself. And I think ultimately Spence will punch him more than he's able to punch Spence. And I'll take Errol Spence by a decision in a 7-5, maybe 8-4 kind of fight. I could see either guy getting stopped late, but my final pick, well, not my final pick, but my pick right now, I would take Spence by decision in a very entertaining fight, in a very spirited affair. And they will shake hands after all this talk early in the week about I'm not going to shake his hand after the fight. And they will put on the kind of scrap that both men respect each other a lot in that fight thereafter.
Radio doesn't like to make picks, but history needs a fix. Spence in 6. I mean, honestly, Sean, I'm worried.
Yeah.
I'm fucking really worried.